Hey everybody, this is Carter and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series between writers. First, I'm just going to mention, and I've been mentioning in my podcast, that I am now offering, or at least advertising, I have been doing this for a while, I am now offering one-on-one coaching and mentoring services. So if you're an aspiring writer, a struggling writer, established writer who's just looking for kind of advice and trying to get to that next level, somebody you can talk to in terms of we can do developmental edits to your manuscript. We can just talk about marketing and PR and all those different things you can be doing, navigating the publishing industry, or even taking a step back and talking about, finding your why as a writer, because that sounds silly, I know, but it's a real thing, and you really need to understand why it is you're writing before you can figure out what it is you want to achieve with your writing. And all that is necessary before you can figure out the actual steps that it will take to get there. And why people write is often different when they really explore it than what they had originally thought. Some people write out of spite. Some people write out of tenacity. Some people write out of boredom. Some people, ill-advised, write to get rich and famous. And some people, I think, kind of like myself, write for therapy. It's a way to escape, and it's a way to reflect and to explore characters who maybe have a semblance to you, but you can live vicariously through them and test the boundaries of fear and anxiety, depending on what you're writing, and love. All those different things. And as I explained in with my conversation today, to me, writing is a form of meditation. So if you are looking for any kind of coaching services for writing, for the why of writing, please just hop on over to my website at carterwilson.com and let's have a free consultation. So getting back to my guest today. So I talked to a debut author today. And I love debut authors because I loved being a debut author, and I was always so grateful of any advice or help that I got as a debut author. So today I spoke to Emily Smith. So Emily Smith has written a fantastic book called You Always Come Back, and I got the chance to be an early reader and was able to blurb it, and it's a wonderful, wonderful book. Highly recommend you check it out. And she, she's interesting. She studied writing in school, both undergraduate and then got an MFA, and it's kind of always known she wanted to be a writer, and kind of looked around and studied TV writing for a while before deciding that at least for the time being, wasn't a right fit for her. So that's why she went and got her MFA and decided to write novels. And it was great to listen to her experiences, finding that agent, as difficult as that is. And she actually found one fairly quickly, but then selling the book takes time if you're able to do it at all. And so her release just came out as of the time of this podcast, probably a couple months ago. And so she's gone through that exciting, difficult, hard to believe it actually happened process, and now is kind of in the mindset of like, okay, what does my career trajectory look like? What do I want to do next? What is my plan? And as much as you can have a plan in this industry. So it's an exciting time for sure. And she's had great success with her book. She's with Crooked Lane Books, which is a wonderful publisher. And I can't wait to see what her next book is, because I was so happy and thrilled with what she wrote before, You Always Come Back. So I think you're going to like this one. She's fantastic. This is my conversation with Emily Smith.
Hello. Hi, Carter.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Looks all nice and sunny there.
It is. We had a ton of rain in Jersey, and it finally like got nice today. I'm like, okay, fall's back on.
Where in Jersey are you?
Kind of right outside of Morristown, so about an hour outside of New York City.
Okay. Do you go into the city much or not so much?
I do. I try like once every 2 to 3 months typically. It's a full day thing. Like taking NJ Transit in is no joke and back out. But yeah, I go to Broadway shows with my cousins,
Oh, no.
once in a while in and out for a museum. But I went to school there too. So I love it, but I'm just as happy here.
Well, congratulations on your release. That's pretty exciting, huh?
Yeah, I'm so excited. Thank you, by the way, for a blurb. I know for writers that don't know, that's very stressful process. So I really appreciate you writing one for me.
Well, I got kind of contacted out of the blue from your publisher at you're with Crooked Lane, right?
Yes.
And I just remember, with my debut, not even my debut with any book, just this gratitude I felt for anybody who would give me a blurb. And so, and then you get to the point where you're like, all right, I am paying it forward. And over time you can't say yes to everything, but you can say yes to a lot of things. But blurbs are a tricky thing, right? Because I think different people treat them differently. And I've always kind of made the commitment of like, I'm reading this whole book. I'm going to speak from the heart, and pray to God that I like it. And if I know that I can't do that, I just say no rather than, give some vapid quote that's meaningless. But I truly enjoyed the book, and I was excited that I got the opportunity to read it. And yeah, I know what it's like to be heading in that debut stride and wondering what's next and all that kind of stuff. So I'm interested to talk to you about kind of that whole process for you, but the actual release itself, is it different than what you expected? I guess it's hard to know what to expect.
I feel like it was definitely different. I was told two different things, that it would either be like a very big day or a very anticlimactic day. Mm-hmm. And I felt like the people in my lives made it a very big day.
That's great.
I was really overwhelmed, like with gratitude for everybody, for the publisher, for, people who wrote blurbs, reviews. But I also think I was in the minority. It kind of never occurred to me, right? I've been sitting here writing for years that somebody would actually read my book. But it never, like as silly as that sounds, like it kind of never occurred to me. And all of a sudden these people are coming out of the woodwork that don't know me from Adam, and they're going, oh my God, I loved it. Or, oh, not for me, and so that's definitely been an experience too, and kind of taking that as it goes and just learning like, okay, like once you've written something, even if it gets published, like at that moment, it's no longer just yours anymore, and it's like out of your hands. So yeah. Yeah,
it makes you feel, there's a vulnerability to that, right? Where you're just absolutely. Like, you feel you're always exposed as a writer. Like I feel like writers spend 95% of the time trying to like make sure nobody reads their work because they're scared. And then when that 5% hits, it's kind of horrifying, even with the good stuff, because you feel very like naked, because people will say stuff to you about your book that maybe you don't even remember, or maybe like they thought something was horrifying that you're like, that was not horrifying to me at all, or just this whole different perspective on it. It's weird.
It is. And I feel very fortunate. I did both. Like my bachelor's and my MFA were in writing. So I feel very fortunate. I feel like compared to some probably debut authors that come out that have never been critiqued, I was just sitting around a classroom where somebody would look at your face and go, yeah, your dialogue's not working. And they might say it in a very less pleasant way than that, or this is a little tone deaf or insensitive. And like those kind of classrooms gave me rooms to make mistakes. So then I felt like it doesn't hurt now. Like if somebody's like, this book wasn't for me, it's a do not finish, where I don't know how I would have felt had I come out as a debut, not having had kind of that thicker skin. Cause that must be hard for some people, for sure. Where now I'm like, oh, there's another 3-star, and you move on, you're with your day, and get the 10, 5 or 4s,
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because it does depend on what that criticism is, right?
Totally.
If the criticism was she's a terrible writer. That's totally different than this book isn't for me. But you're beyond that terrible writer phase because you got published. And a lot of people think, well, I've read terrible things I've gotten published. But the truth is, it's exceptionally hard to get an agent. It's even harder to get published. And the very minimum, you have to be able to write well. So most of the criticisms are about things like, all right, if I'm shooting to please 60% of my audience, which is about the best you can hope for, then of course you're going to have people who didn't like the fact that you killed a dog or whatever the hell you did in your book.
Yeah.
It just happens. But I'm sure having that MFA was helpful because even like critique groups, like getting used to being in a critique group is, some people can't take it. And some people can't critique either. So
no, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I always felt like it was very insightful. Like if one person had one comment, you knew like, okay, take that with a grain of salt. If everyone in the room is saying the same thing, it's like, okay, I probably have a hole in my manuscript right there. Like that's where I need to revisit, so
you're looking for the plurality of comment for sure.
Exactly.
And then maybe there's that one or maybe two people that you just really, really trust. And if they say something, you're like, and there's a thing where it just kind of resonates with you, right? You're like, once they say, you're like, oh, of course. And that's what good editors do as well. But I want to back up a little bit just to kind of understand how you got to be where you are now. And you obviously studied writing. So I'm guessing at some kind of an early age, that lit a fire for you, the idea of being a writer.
Yeah. I've known I want to be a writer since I was 4, which I feel like is, I know.
It's a little bit early.
Or at least if not a writer, in some form knew I was going to be a storyteller.
Yeah.
Just because we always, my parents moved a lot, but we were always in Jersey and we always grew up in like very like remote places. And my older brother is autistic and he's my only biological sibling. So, and he's nonverbal. So it was very much like my poor parents were so overwhelmed, and it was, the 90s where we were, autism diagnoses were just starting to happen. All of these new therapies were coming out. So they were like, okay, your brother won't stop running. We need you to sit and like entertain yourself and be good. So I feel like that kind of forced me like, okay, like, what am I going to do? I have to sit here and, figure out something. So I was that kid with all the play sets that was just like making the stories or drafting the little picture books of like, the rain cloud that turned into a rainbow, like just handing that to my parents. I was always writing on scraps of paper for as long as I can remember. And yeah, I always was a huge storyteller in every way I could possibly be, and just consuming it in any way I could.
That's interesting. And the timing is always fascinating too. And I have a theory, which I don't think holds water, but, I always think about, there you are in the 90s making all those things to entertain yourself, and you didn't have a phone, right?
No.
If you were growing up 20 years later, do those writers miss that opportunity because they're consumed with their devices? And that sounds like a very grumpy old man thing to say, but I'm always curious about that. You wonder, because I watch my kids just sit there on their phones and they have their own great college careers and things like that. But you wonder if it stymies the ability to really use your imagination in other ways.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. I've got a kid stepbrother who's 10 years younger than me, and he grew up completely different age. And I lived a nanny part-time in grad school, and they grew up with phones, and iPads. And I feel like I just missed that mark, and I'm so glad I did. That phones were not like really starting to be in people's hands until I was in high school.
Yeah.
And that was to my benefit because I was still of that kind of old school age, even if at the tail end of it, of being able to go, okay, we don't have a screen in front of us. How do I entertain myself?
Yeah, totally. And so you went to school and you studied, your undergraduate was in what?
It was in dramatic writing. Well, I city hopped a bit. So I went to Emerson College my first year as a TV writing major, transferred to NYU Tisch, which they're really well known for that. or I thought I was going to be a TV writer, but I was also, their whole dramatic writing program is, TV, screenwriting, and playwriting. So it was kind of great because it was like a hybrid program where I got like classics background too, and kind of novels in general. And then went to DC to do my MFA eventually in just regular creative writing, because by then I'd sort of pivoted and gone, okay, TV writing's probably not going to be for me. The whole LA life, which just not appealing by the time I was done with my undergrad.
So you had an understanding of the lifestyle through your studies of like, this is what the life of a TV writer actually looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it was a matter of logistics too, where I think, again, I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I was starting to look at my life, and a lot changed for me because my mom passed when I was 20. So, and because my brother has special needs, I was like, all right, in reality, long term, like I'm his only biological sibling. I'm going to have to live kind of close to home, because I am his like second caretaker after my dad. So it's like, I can't up and move to LA. I could try to do the TV writing thing in New York, but just didn't really, but at that point in my life, it didn't appeal to me. Yeah. So I was like, all right, what am I passionate about? And I went through like the whole, like, maybe I'll go be a baker instead, like all these different kind of random career moments that you hear different writers have. And I kind of had like a lost year there. And then kind of coming out of it, I was like, all right, you always want to be a novelist, as silly as that sounds. Like, and everybody's like, oh my God, I want to be a novelist. And, they're constantly jotting things down. But I really started to take myself seriously and went, okay, there's clearly something here. Like, this is my passion. And I was like, all right, why not an MFA? Like, I've always been good at school, and I don't recommend an MFA to everybody.
Yeah.
It definitely depends, but for me, it felt like the right choice at the right time. And like the moment I got there, I was like, okay, yes, this was the right choice. And I felt like something clicked that hadn't for TV writing for me.
Yeah. And it's a tough decision, right? Because you're also probably thinking like, how am I going to make a living? How am I going to pay for my MFA? And it's not like the idea is like, as the dissertation novel that I wrote for my MFA is going to sell for $1 million advance 3 months after I get out of school. So there's a long lead time. And it's a hard decision, but I want to go back to what you were just saying, how like everyone wants to write a novel. And that's, I find that fascinating because I think it's true. And when you meet people, say you're at a cocktail party, you meet somebody and they find out you're a novelist, they start to say, oh, I've always wanted to write a novel, or I always started a novel. And it's crazy to me. And I hope this doesn't sound weird, but it's crazy to me how few people actually do it. And because you could see in them their excitement, and they really have a passion for the idea of it. And it is hard for sure, but a lot of things are hard. Whatever their day job is, it's probably exceptionally hard. But they just don't do it. Again, they find all these different excuses, and it's more rare the person's like, all right, I'm doing this and I want to see what that's like. And it might suck and I might fail, but I want to see. But very few people kind of hit that stride. But you clearly knew that was going to be an end game for you.
Yeah, I think I was proving something to myself too, because it was like always like that dream. And I've thought about it a lot. Like, what's the difference, right, between like talent and drive? Because I feel like talent gets you only so far in like this world, right? Like, talent's wonderful. And I don't think you can, yes, we've all read published books that are maybe not our favorite, but I think you can only get so far on talent. But I think that's what separates the people that want to do it from the people that end up executing it. It's just, you go through the motions and you're like, okay, it's going to take me maybe a year or two to get an agent, and I need to be willing to put that time in. And
if you get an agent,
if you ever get one, and I got very fortunate, I got one in 3 months, and I was so lucky, and he's a gem. And I just looked at it. But I was very prepared for like that long haul, because that was one thing. And I always tell people about that when they ask, should I do an MFA? Should I not? And I was like, listen, my MFA taught me how to write. It didn't tell me how to get an agent or how to get published.
It's not on the business side of things.
Yeah, exactly. They should teach a business class, and they don't. So I've
heard that a lot.
Yeah. And I had to learn that the hard way, but I was like, all right, Google is my best friend. And yeah, and I went, and I I've even tried to help other people. I'm like, listen, here's what I didn't know, which I wish I did. Like, and I'll send people like, go to manuscript wish list. Here's how you apply for an agent. This is what a query letter is. And, it's funny to me, and I'm sure you see it all the time with so many books down the pipeline, but even just after one, I've had so many people come to be like, how do I do this? And I think I've had one person actually take me up on it,
Well,
like,
and
yeah.
Yeah, and it drives me nuts personally. Like if somebody wants to talk about just, the business, the writing, like 100% of the time I will take that call. But when I get an email that says, how do I find an agent? How do I get published? And I'm like, dude, like, what do I write to this? I'm like, do what I did, which was what you did, which was Google the hell out of all those questions and take time. Because I had to learn from zero background of writing, zero background of publishing industry. I discovered all on my own. And I'm like, it takes tenacity and time, but it's not that terribly difficult. And I think you're right about the talent thing. I find the talent conversation fascinating because it's hard to define what that talent even looks like and how it's even used. But I think talent grows over time. And so much of talent is just being able to identify what move to make next. And whether that's how to grow as a writer, how to redo your query letter because you're getting rejections. So much of that is just kind of on the job learning. But yeah, the not giving up is 100% what most people run into. They're like, okay, well, I tried and it didn't work. Well, of course it didn't work. It never works. You got to keep trying.
Go bring something else.
Yeah, totally. I got an agent with my first book after maybe a year, but my first 3 books didn't sell. So it's so easy to give up. But like, do you like what you're doing? Do you enjoy the storytelling? Are you able to fit it into your busy schedule? If you can answer yes to those, like, then don't even think about it. Just keep doing it. And, things will happen eventually.
That's how I feel too. I wrote 3 novels as well, and I did the thing you're not supposed to do. And I went out with 2 of them and started querying 2 different lists of different agents because
they were different genres?
Different genres because I didn't know what I wanted to be. When I started writing, I was going out with like action adventure, like thrillers. Like I thought I was going to write, be like the female version of Jack Carr. Like I had one of those groups, and then I have, what I ended up kind of falling into the lane and what I signed an agent and got a book deal off of, which was more crime thrillers.
Right.
But yeah, and I'm a big believer in just you keep writing, and it's just like keep throwing stuff against the wall until something sticks. I feel like a lot of people get a little bogged down and go, I want to be, like the next F. Scott Fitzgerald and have this great American novel, and they work on it for 10 years. And yes, there's so many of those that get published that are beautiful and worth the time. But I knew I wasn't going to be the next F. Scott Fitzgerald, right? So I was like, okay, what's going to work here? And I think it's that tenacity that really pays off in the end.
Yeah, that eventually gets married to what you discover to be your own voice. And, because there's a lot of people who write a lot of different types of things, but you will see that their voice shines in one particular realm. And yeah, over 10 books, my voice has totally changed and that's become more comfortable. And I'm like, oh, first person present is where I shine. I can do third person past, but I'm not as good at it. But that took me 3 books to figure that out. So it's weird how it changes over time. And I'm sure having written all those other books as well, you've seen that for yourself as well.
Yeah. And since then too, right? It took a while. It took a year for this first debut to sell. So in the meantime, my agent was like, go write another book. And I was figuring things out in the meantime from that. So I think I'm on my 5th manuscript now. And I feel like a lot of people, that's another misconception, is that they think, oh, like once you're published once, every single book you write after that is going to get published, or every single concept. And I'm learning that as I go right now, like my agent talking about like, no, like eventually you're going to go out on submission and you only have to write 75 pages. If you don't have to write a full novel anymore. And we try to sell that way, and it like depends on the genre and the situation. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
You have to like learn as you go. And, I feel like such a newbie at all of this, but
yeah. Oh, everybody's different, right? So I write standalones only. And so I always was used to pitching one book at a time. So I was always used to having that book done. And then, I did one time I did a 2-book deal, but generally speaking, I'm like, I'm going to write what I'm interested in, and I'm going to hope it sells. Because you never know. But if you're doing what you love, if you're telling the story that you think is interesting, hopefully it'll work. And also, since I don't outline, I have no idea what I would give to it by. I can give them the first 75 pages and say, like, I have no understanding what's going to happen next. And these first 75 are surely all going to change.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's great. I wish I could write that way. I am such a plotter. I need an outline. Like, I might freestyle write like the first 2 chapters. And after that, I'm like, it might change and the outline might evolve like 10 different times, but I at least need to know the beats of where I'm going. But that might be the TV writing training, right? Of like the kind of the skeleton of the screenplay that
Totally
back to haunt me.
And likewise, I get jealous of people like you who can plot so well, because if I know, like, the most I'll ever plot is maybe 2 to 3 chapters. And if I know that, then like when I sit down to write, I'm almost not even looking at the screen. It's easy because I built that muscle over time. The hardest part for me is just figuring out like what makes sense and how does this plot work. And I just write, all right, well, what would they do next? And then I finish a shitty first draft, and then I'm like, all right, now I've got that done. So now I can go gut this and have it finally make sense. It's the only way I know how to do it, but it's a painstaking process.
No, I get you. Yeah. And there's nuances to everyone. It's like funny. Like, I write dialogue first and I'm like, why?
I met one person who said, and that's probably TV writing right there, probably screenwriting, because that's all it is. But I met an author at Thriller Fest who said, I write only dialogue, the entire book is all dialogue. And then I go in and fill in the rest. I'm like, that was the most bizarre, but I'm like, it kind of makes sense. It's writing the screenplay, and then you're adding in all the things the director would actually say as they're filming. So I'm like, I guess it's just your background. So you're going through this process and you finally sell your debut, and you're really getting into the weeds of the industry and all of the fickleness of the publishing industry. I'm curious, this is a weird question, but with your name, do you, because I'm even, Googling you, I'm like, there are a lot of Emily Smiths who are authors.
There are. In retrospect, perhaps I should have gone with a pen name.
Was that ever a discussion?
With my agent and publisher, no. They were like very supportive of that. And I never even really considered it. And I think I always looked at it, right? Because I'm not married yet. And I wanted as silly as it sounds like, I wanted my dad's last name on something. Because my older brother.
Not silly at all.
Yeah. Because of his special needs, he's not going to have kids. My younger brother's a stepbrother, so he has a different last name. So I was just like, I wanted there to be something that like I could say, okay, not only is this just me as Emily Smith, but also like something to carry on for that. And I'm also honestly secondary. I'm a very private person that I didn't want it to be able that you could Google me and, be able to find me exactly, like I like that there's kind of a bunch of, and I can live in some form of obscurity if this ever does take off,
See, you might like that, but your publisher is not going to like that.
No.
Which is what it's so
fall after this.
Yeah, I'm always it's publishers these days, and I hear this from them, like you have an agent who submits you to a publisher as a debut. They are Googling you, right? They want to see, what does your presence look like? What does your social media footprint look like? How are people going to find you? So, for example, what is your website? Do you have a website?
Yeah, it's msmithwrites.com. And even trying to find that is quite difficult. And I had zero media presence until about 2 weeks ago when the book came out, and even now it's primarily Instagram. So I'm trying to up it. But yeah, that's a whole other side I'm learning as well. It's just, half of it is writing the book. The other half is promoting it.
Yeah.
Especially when you're at kind of more of not a big 5 publisher, but smaller, like you are kind of marketing yourself, especially as a debut when you don't have, a built-in audience already.
Right. And there's only so much you can do, and there's only so much money you can spend. For every book that I've ever released, and I started this, obviously with my debut, I've always hired my own outside PR firm. And that was super helpful when I was with a tiny little press that didn't have any marketing support, and is still helpful, but Sourcebooks has a great PR team. But you realize, like, I could spend my entire life promoting my book, but where's the diminishing returns? And I think it's pretty soon. I think, like, you can only shout so much before people are like, we get it, you wrote a book.
Yeah, exactly.
It's about building your personality online, who happens to also be a writer. But for somebody who likes to be private, which most writers are skew introverts, that's abhorrent to them, the idea of, like, putting themselves out there. But it's definitely a consideration you have to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you running into that? Are like doing events and things like that? Are you comfortable in that space?
Yeah, it's odd. So my day job is insurance. So, and I've gone and I've given talks to 60 people at a time in, like, a pavilion. Like, I going back to high school, like, I was the stage manager. Like, I have no problem talking to people.
Talking about yourself.
Talking about myself is so funny. I can get up and I can give a 20-minute or a 2-hour speech on insurance, but you asked me to sit down to one person and tell them the plot of my book, and my father and my boyfriend were making fun of me. They're like, you can't even do it. You turn beet red. Yeah, it's such an insecure, moment for me, of just being like, yeah, I wrote a book, and I was at a party the other night, and I'm like, you don't have to buy it. Like, thank you so much. Like, don't feel obligated. I get not everybody's a reader, and I keep joking with everyone. I'm like, if you do, it makes a great paperweight, a piece, kindling. Like, I don't know.
You're so self-deprecating. I always tell people you don't have to read it, just buy it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, just boost my numbers. If you never read it, I don't care. And so it's super sweet of everybody wanting to support. But yeah, it is definitely an interesting feelings. But I've been trying to do, like, the local angles. So I've been doing, like, library readings and things like that, like, around town. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, am I going to put that on my social medias? Like, I don't know.
You are. You're going to put it on your social media. You're going to put it on the events calendar on your website, which you're going to update once a week.
Yeah.
Yeah. All that stuff.
Advice. Thank you.
I mean, it's learning. And that's what actually one thing that a good PR firm will do is they'll audit your presence, and and they will tell you, don't do everything, because you can't. Find what you like to do, whatever that, maybe it's Instagram is your thing. Okay, lean into that. Maybe newsletters are your thing, but they will tell you all those things about, making sure people can find you, best way to write it, and all that kind of stuff. And that's been definitely helpful for me, for sure. So, but it's not cheap, it's.
No. Yeah. And that's part of it too, is how much money do you want to put into your own work, and, or are you financially able to? So it's
right. And you can't measure the efficacy or the return of that investment ever. And that's so frustrating. But I've always, like, felt like, well, you got to be as smart as you can, get recommendations and things like that in terms of if you're going to go with the PR firm, who to use. But then just, like, know, like, what I'm doing is I'm giving, in my opinion, my book the best possible chance to succeed. That doesn't mean it will, but I think it'll be in a better shape than had I not done this. I don't know if that means by 100 copies or by 10,000 copies. You have no idea of knowing. But if you have the means, I've always recommended it because I think it's been good for me, but it's a tough decision.
No, I might ping you about that later.
Yeah, for sure. It's always difficult. What was so you had the agent and you had these 3 books, and then when your debut finally sold, was that, and Crooked Lane is a great publisher, was that a long process? Had you gone through a lot of rejections, or were they one of the first ones you went to?
Oh gosh, I think we went through like 30 rejections over the course of a year, and to the point where I think we had it still out with like 8 or 10 publishers. And my agent was like, all right, like we're going to give it another 2 months and then we're probably going to queue up your next book and we'll go out with that. And we'll see what happens. And then Crooked Lane swooped in and my editor was like, I love it. I want it. And I was just so relieved. I was like, oh, wonderful. And it was one of those last minute, I didn't think it was even going to sell. And it did. So, which is so wonderful. And a lot of people don't realize too, like your agent doesn't get paid until you get paid. So my agent had been out here hustling for a year for me, until we had a book deal, and some do much longer than that. So,
right. Yeah, and they don't get paid till you get paid, and you're usually not talking a lot of money because you're not making a ton of money and they're making 15% of your not ton of money.
Yeah,
and so they're investing in you. So when an agent or a publisher says yes to you, it's almost never because of this book. It's because of, I think that you could have a good career as a writer. And so I'm investing in the long-term future of your success because that's the only way it's going to pay off. So a lot of people don't realize that either, that it's like, they think, when the publisher's always going to ask, what else does she have? They want to know. And so was that a conversation you had with Crooked Lane? Were you like, I'm writing a sequel, or I'd be another standalone that's about this?
Yeah, so because it had taken so long, I already had another standalone already lined up. So I was able to, my agent and I were like, here, and it's in my contract, publishers have till a certain date. Sometimes it's before the first book comes out. Sometimes it's a certain amount after to be able to go, whether they want it or not. So I was fortunate in that I had one ready to go, which
and
not everyone.
Did they buy it, and they bought it?
Not yet. We're still waiting on that.
You're in the option period. Yeah,
we're in option period of the anxiety, like fingers crossed, like some more books. Oh God!
And you're always so like, because the cycle of love that you have with a book is crazy, because you fall in love, and then halfway through there's rumblings of discontent, and towards the end you kind of hate it, and at the very end you love it again because you're done with it. But then when you're asked to go back and look at it, you hate it all over again. So you have for me, I have such little confidence by the time a book actually goes after the agent and to the publisher. I'm like, I don't know. I hope they like it.
No. Yeah, exactly. I go through the same stages with it where I'm like, I've never written anything crappier in my life. Oh my God, it's a masterpiece. Or it's probably something in between,
And then they agree to buy it and they show you the advantage. You're like, no, the book is great. It's worth so much more than that. What, are you kidding me? It's a pretty terrible industry.
That's why I'm so happy for those who aren't represented by agents. I don't know how they do it, because when it comes to the money stuff, I'm like, I don't know what's fair. I don't know what's not. I'm just happy you're publishing it. Like, great, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, my agent's great. She gets on fire. When someone gives it her offer, she's like, no. I'm like, okay. But that's what she does, and she's good at that.
No, mine's a hustler too. He's on it. He's like, what else you got? We're gonna get it out there, and he keeps me honest, which is nice. So
after all that experience you had in school and getting feedback and getting critiques, what was your experience like with your very first editorial letter?
Not bad, because I actually didn't have a whole lot of notes. Like it was more. Nice. I was fortunate. Mine wasn't a whole lot of what I always read was like content notes, right? Where it's like this character doesn't work at all, or you need to rework this entire section of the book. Mine was like more move paragraphs around, grammar, change this person's name.
That's great.
Honestly, it was a dream. I was so grateful, and I doubt I'll ever have that experience again. I'm just waiting for the next book is going to be just like, total content edits.
Yeah.
But
I've had several of both, and but when you get the really rough ones, they've already bought it. So, it's not like do all this work and then maybe we'll buy it.
Yeah.
So, they like it. And then if you frame your mind of like, okay, you want a subplot. Okay. But but you start to get it. You're like, okay, everything they're doing is to make the book better, obviously, right? There's no
Exactly.
sense of like, this person's trying to backstab me or screw me up. Like there's zero incentive for that to happen in our situation. So then you're just like, okay, this is my opportunity to sit down and get better, to learn and to understand. And that's not always easy to do, but that's the frame of mind you have to have, I think, in order to give it your all, because you can't half-ass those notes.
No, absolutely not. And I think I went through like 3 rounds with it, and there was always things changing and coming up. But yeah, the biggest thing was the names, and we debated that a while, because in my book, my characters are named after days or of months of the year,
Right.
and they abbreviate them.
Right.
And it was a big discussion with the publisher, like, is that going to turn readers off? Should we change them? So some of those adjusted slightly, and it was a lot of compromising, and things like my title changed, from what my original one
But that's
was,
nothing. That happens. That's
nothing. Exactly. And you learn as you go, like, oh, my title can change. Cool. Oh, the cover is going to be, marketing team picks the cover, like you get a vote, but not final vote. And it's just all learning experience. And at the end of the day, like you said, I was just grateful. And I looked at it like, all right, they all know what they're doing way more than I do for their respective departments. So.
Yeah. I mean, I can't think, maybe once or twice there's been a comment from my editor that, and it's crazy to think that the editor's always like, you totally don't have to do this. Yeah. And I think, like, of course I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And I think there's been like 1 or 2 comments that I really just didn't agree with, but they were like super minor. But when you look at these, like, yeah, totally, you're right. I wish I would have thought of that first.
Exactly. Like, everybody's a team trying to make it better, and we won't always all get it right, but I look at it like it really kind of does become a group project at that level. And you're like kind of at the head of it with your editor, but it's, what's going to sell the most books and what's going to get you the most readership. So I just feel so much gratitude that like Cursive Link took a chance in the first place, and, and everything they've done since then, and same with like my editor and my agent. Like, so many people don't get to this level even,
Totally. And it's so easy to get down on yourself. So my first publisher went out of business about 6 months after my book came out. My second publisher, which was a little bit bigger, they published a book, but then they didn't want the next one because the first book didn't sell enough. They said they loved the book, but they weren't going to take it.
Yeah.
Then
that's a rough answer.
That's a rough answer, and that's the reality of it. Although it still kind of pisses me off because it earned out and everything. My third and fourth publishers were great, and then we actually turned down an offer to them for my 5th book because I wanted to get bigger, and then I got rejected by the top 5 publishers after I turned down an existing offer. So, and then I found a home with source books, which ended up being great. But it's there is no linear progression in this industry, and that's on both the good and bad side of it. So, your second book could be, or your 10th book could be a breakout mega bestseller. You never know. And I know people who have had that happen on their first book and never returned to that level again. So you
hear it all the time.
It keeps you on your toes.
Yeah. And it's just, I think you never know what's going to happen. And I feel like my goal is just to stay consistent and keep writing, because I feel like that can be a thing too, where people just go, okay, I'm going to take a couple years off, and I'm at a point in my life where I'm like, I don't have kids yet. Like, what is this ever going to happen again? Let me write as much as I can. And just in general, just to keep putting stuff out there. And I don't know, and hop around genres. It's all so new to me. And learning like whether you can or you can't. Should I be sticking in the crime novel? Like, I'm actively pinging my poor agent constantly with these questions. Like, can I write like a sci-fi novel? Like, is that cool? Is that a mistake at this time? And he's like, let's stick with crime for like another book or 2.
Yeah. And that's what your agent's there for. I mean, because again, they're invested into you. So they want to know those questions. They don't want you to go off and write that sci-fi book without even telling them about it.
Exactly.
But you're right. I mean, all you can do is you have to learn to let go a lot. And that includes like, okay, I've over edited this manuscript. It's not going to be perfect. Here's what it is. And I have to let it go. But with a career, you kind of like, if you keep writing you will succeed. But you can only keep writing if you love it and you have a passion for it. If you treat it like, I'm looking forward to that 1 to 2 hours every day, that's my escape, as opposed to I'm doing this as a side hustle career move, which
Yeah.
I think never works, because you're never going to make enough money to make you happy, and you're never going to have the passion that you need to continue to do it. That's my opinion, at least.
No, I absolutely agree. I look at it like, I might not be in the mood to do it every day, but I think about it, if I had to stop writing tomorrow, would I be happy and content in my life? And the answer is no.
Of course not. Yeah, and if you think about, like, if you can't picture yourself not writing, and again, that doesn't mean you write every single day, but most days, then like I feel like I would have to be totally, incapacitated to not write,
Literally.
because I just, it's my meditation every day. I'm alone. I've got everything in place, and I've got my mind thinking about something that's totally different than any other aspect of my life. And that forces you to be in the present moment so fiercely that it's crazy how, like, almost like healing that exercise is, of being so focused and so present, like meditation is. So it's my meditation. Well, I want to congratulate you again on your debut, and we're going to wrap up here in a second. But before we do, we're going to do the storytelling part.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
of the podcast. And that's the right attitude, Emily. Not everybody has that attitude.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm terrified, but at the same time,
some people are like, oh, shit. I had one person who's like, what are we doing? I'm like, didn't you read my emails, motherfucker? And it was really awkward.
Yeah.
But it's a silly little thing. I've got 3 books that I picked out, not quite at random. They were all sitting right next to each other in my signed edition section of my bookshelf. I just grabbed them all. You're going to choose one of the books. We're going to pick a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence, and that'll be the first sentence in maybe a 2-minute long short story. So I'll read the sentence. You give me the next 1 or 2, whatever you want. I'll go, and then we'll kill it after a couple minutes. So I've got Jeffrey Deaver's The Final Twist.
Okay.
Stacey Abrams, While Justice Sleeps. A lot of people don't know she is also a novelist. And John Grisham's Camino Winds. So choose one of those.
Oh, gosh. I think I have to do Grisham, just because if my grandfather listens to this, he's going to be mad if I don't.
You don't want to make grandfather mad.
No.
Give me a page between 1 and 300.
45.
So I'm going to quickly scan page 45. Lots of dialogue on this page.
Perfect. Up my alley.
But we're not going to go with dialogue.
Okay.
This is a very simple sentence that lends itself to a lot of different pathways.
Okay.
Bruce took the flashlight and examined the wall.
Okay. He didn't think the house he was in was haunted when he walked in, but when he saw what was written on the wall, he started to think otherwise.
He also knew ghosts weren't typically able to write. He had only seen that happen one other time in his long career as a paranormal investigator. It was probably most likely the work of bored kids. But then he took his other flashlight, the one that really would tell him the truth, and turned it on, and the black light lit up the wall in front of him.
Seeing that, it was confirmed for him it was definitely a ghost, because it was some sort of ectoplasm goo that there could be no other explanation for. And when he turned around, that's when he saw her.
She was unlike any other spirit he had ever witnessed. Most were just hallucinations at best, ill-figured forms, translucent whispers. Not her. She was so real, he thought if he were to walk up and touch her, he would feel her cold flesh. What is your name? He asked her.
I am such an old ghost that I do not recall, she said, and then led him down the hallway. Bruce debated whether he should, because again, this was a ghost and possibly a haunted house. He didn't know her intentions. And then she stopped at the doorway leading to the basement, and it creaked open on its own, and she drifted down the stairs into the darkness.
Oh, I think we call it there. I like that. There's some bad stuff that happened in that basement. That's all.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah.
He's a little bit too cocky because he's kind of been hardened over the years and he maybe doesn't even totally believe in what he does. Yeah. So he's a little bit cocky, and then he goes down the stairs and the door shuts, and then it turns into Stephen King's 1408 at that point.
Yeah, I was going to say, make it out alive. I don't know.
Well, listen, congratulations, Emily, on your debut. That's very exciting, and I'm so looking forward to seeing what you do next and your career arc. And I hope we're able to meet in person someday.
I hope so too. And thank you again for the blurb and for having me. This was so much fun and such a cool first podcast to be on. So thank you.
Awesome. My pleasure. We'll talk soon. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. So that's it. That is my conversation with Emily Smith, who is fantastic. And I know you agree with me. So thank you for that. Her debut novel, which just came out in October 2023, is You Always Come Back, which is a great read. If you want to go read more about that book or find out anything you want to find out about Emily, in as much as she's willing to share, you can go to her website, which is emsmithwrites.com. That's emsmithwrites.com. And while you're on the internet, while you're poking around, while you're bored, while you're scrolling, pop on over to my website, carterwilson.com. You can check out my books, my appearances, my blog posts, and subscribe to my newsletter, all that good stuff. There's even a section there where you can look at my photography. I'm a very extremely amateur photographer, but I like taking pretty pictures, and some of them I put up on my website. So that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Making It Up. I loved my conversation with Emily. More episodes coming out very soon, likely next week. In the meantime, take care.